Absolutely no one would be able to comprehend how a sweet child, who at some point in his life was the apple of his teacher's eye, ended up a violent criminal. And not just any kind of criminal. Richard Chase went by the name of the Vampire of Sacramento, also known as the Vampire Killer. From biting the heads off of birds to drinking the blood of humans, Richard Chase committed some of the most dreadful crimes ever known in the world of serial killers. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we will be looking at the spooky case of Richard Chase. Richard was born on the 23rd of May, 1950 in Sacramento, California. His parents were Richard Chase Sr. and Beatrice Chase. While his father was known for working with computers, his mother was a school teacher. It was said that Richard was just like many other kids during his childhood, fairly average. His father, Chase Sr., was quite strict, which affected how he raised Richard. He would often abuse him, physically and verbally. Richard was not the only one who suffered at his father's hands. His mother, Beatrice, was also given the same treatment. Because Richard's father was a disciplinarian to the core, they were almost always in disagreement. When Richard was only 2 years old, his father force-fed him until he vomited. It was also said that Richard had began receiving physical abuse from his father even at that time. Richard's sister, Pamela, was born when he was 4 years old. As a child, Pamela witnessed their father aggressively beat up Richard. On one occasion, after one of their many confrontations, Pamela recalled their father shaking Richard and throwing him against the wall. From the academic aspect of things, Richard was quite well behaved in school. His teachers loved him and often described him as a sweet child. He was also popular and friendly with his peers. They would often invite him to birthday parties or at their home. And he also returned the gesture. Richard's social life didn't just stop at making friends. He was also very active in sports and was said to have been fairly good at them. Aside from his awful household troubles, it seemed like Richard had an almost perfect childhood. So, at what point did things start to go wrong? By the age of 10, Richard started to display symptoms of all three parts of the McDonald triad. The McDonald triad is a theory suggesting the development of violent psychopathy, and its symptoms are fondness for setting fires, cruelty to animals, and enuresis, which means unintentional bedwetting after the age of 5. One day, Beatrice found out that Richard had killed a stray cat and buried it in the flowers. She, however, thought nothing of it, as she made no mention of it. It appeared that Beatrice wasn't the only one who began to notice these traits in Richard. His father, Chase Sr., did too, but both decided to turn a blind eye. Richard's father was also said to have been good at mismanaging money. He would sometimes come home heavily drunk and begin to have arguments with his wife and children. On several occasions, Beatrice accused him of using drugs and also trying to poison her. The truth of these statements was not certain, however, it was suggested that Beatrice suffered from schizophrenia. Regardless, these were telltale signs that the union between the two was falling apart, so it wasn't much of a surprise when the pair eventually got a divorce. They had gone on a family camping trip when Beatrice accused Chase Sr. of sleeping with one of their neighbors at the campsite. With the constant fights and arguments, the couple paid less attention to both Richard and Pamela, and Richard was able to get away with a lot of things he did. As a teenager, Richard also had some unusual household habits. One of them was going into the kitchen after midnight, trying to prepare some kind of midnight snack. What made this unusual was that whatever he did, the kitchen was usually a mess, and it would not occur to him to clean it up afterward. Other times, he would turn up the heating in the house to 90 degrees, strip off naked, and fall asleep on the sofa. Richard also saw himself as a member of the James Younger Gang, a group of outlaws from the 19th century. It seemed to be more than a mere admiration because he would get a poster of the gang, cut out a photo of himself, and stick it on the poster to make himself look like a part of the gang. In addition to this rather unusual habit, Richard also had his fair share of romantic relationships. While in high school, he met Libby Christopher, and the two dated for a year. However, all of his relationships ended because he was unable to maintain an erection. In a bid to uncover the problem, Richard went to the hospital and was diagnosed with erectile dysfunction. According to the doctor, the direct cause of his erectile dysfunction was suppressed rage. However, Richard believed that it was only because he lacked blood and thought that by drinking the blood of animals, he would replenish his body system. Richard was arrested for the very first time in 1971 after the police caught him in possession of marijuana. He turned out to be an alcoholic and displayed a particular interest in drugs. He was also said to have been using LSD at the time and was constantly in and out of mental hospitals. At this time, Richard's father began to openly express his disappointment in him. When Richard was taken to court for the possession of marijuana, his father refused to hire him a defense attorney, which made Richard angry. After that episode, it became difficult for Richard to fit into the academic standard he had initially set himself as his grades began to drop. Due to his alcohol and drug abuse, Richard developed hypochondria. Later on, he began to make unimaginable claims, saying that his heart had stopped beating and that someone had stolen his pulmonary artery. He would then cut oranges into small pieces and hold them to his head to compensate for his malfunctioning heart and stolen artery. It turned out that he believed he was taking vitamin C if he did that. Another claim he made was that his cranial bones had separated and were moving around. So he had his head shaved so he could watch and monitor the bones moving. Just like he did with his diagnosis of erectile dysfunction, Richard believed the only way he could get better was that if he consumed the blood of animals. As a result, he started to hunt animals, disembowel them, and eat them raw. Sometimes he would blend them with Coca-Cola and drink the mixture. As Richard approached his late teens, he began to grow out his hair and barely took care of himself. So, he mostly appeared messy. His parents again paid no mind to his new look because it was the time of the hippies movement. So, it seemed pretty common. Although his drastic weight loss was another reason for his parents to be alarmed, they thought nothing of it. Richard, on the other hand, kept up with his socially active life notwithstanding, but not for long. One time he was invited to a friend's birthday party and was thrown out after he was caught molesting a girl. He left but returned shortly after with a .22 caliber gun, which fell to the ground when they were, yet again, trying to throw him out. He was then sent to jail, and that marked the second time he landed himself in prison. However, his father bailed him out this time. In 1973, Richard was admitted to the psych ward of the American River Hospital, but was removed by his mother shortly after. In the hospital, he developed the name Dracula. It was said that Richard would sometimes capture birds and bite their heads off. As a result, there were several dead birds in the hospital. On one occasion, a nurse saw that there was blood smeared all over his face, but he told her that he cut himself while shaving. It was suggested that Richard usually killed the birds to drink their blood, perhaps to enhance his erections. After Richard got out of the hospital, he began to stay with both of his parents, but wasn't receiving any form of support from them. So his condition worsened. Reportedly, it was during this time that he got into an argument with his mom, and he slapped her and pushed her head to the floor. In 1976, Richard's father paid him a visit to his apartment, and when he got there, he found out that Richard was very sick. Immediately, he rushed Richard to the hospital, where they found out that he had blood poisoning. It turned out that he had killed a rabbit, and rather than his usual way of operating, where he'd drink the animal's blood, he injected it into his system. It was also said that his mother prevented him from using antipsychotic medication after ensuring he was removed from the psychiatric ward of the American River Hospital. The apartment Richard lived in at this time was said to have been paid for by his parents, and together, they both continued to take care of his bills and groceries. Over time, Richard had several roommates, but none of them were pleased with his behavior. They complained bitterly about how Richard would always walk around the apartment naked, whether or not they had guests over. They also complained about his intake of alcohol, marijuana, and LSD. Eventually, they asked him to leave the apartment, which he didn't do, so they all decided to leave instead. In August 1977, the police found a bucket of liver and blood at the back of Richard's pickup, with Richard himself all covered in blood. But they let him go after Richard explained that the blood and liver belonged to a cow. Around this time, Richard began stealing dogs in his neighborhood and killing them. He would then proceed to either eat them raw or blend them and consume whatever came out of the mixture. On one occasion, his mother caught him tearing up a cat when she paid him a visit to his apartment. She, however, did not report the incident to the police, even though she was scared by it. Later on, Richard added firearms to the long list of things he was fascinated by. Aside from buying firearms and practicing with them, another object of his fascination was learning about two killers, Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, and Angelo Bueno, whom he adored. In 1977, on December 29, Richard's mother had prevented him from coming into her house to spend some time with her since it was the Christmas season. Feeling lonely, angry, and frustrated, he got a .22 caliber pistol and drove to a neighborhood near East Sacramento. He then saw 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin, an engineer with 2 children, who had been helping his wife bring in shopping bags from her car. According to Miss Griffin, she heard 2 pops and saw Griffin falling to the ground and assumed it was a heart attack. However, Richard had shot Griffin twice, with one of the bullets hitting him in his chest, which instantly killed him. 2 weeks later, Richard tried entering a woman's home via her back door, but because the door was locked, he turned and walked away. According to him, locked doors were a sign that he wasn't invited to enter the house. Afterward, Richard perceived unlocked doors as a sign he could go in. By January 1978, Richard had broken into people's homes, causing destruction and stealing things. One of the homes he happened to break into was that of David and Teresa Wallen. Teresa, who was 3 months pregnant, had been the only person at her home because her husband David had gone to work. She came out of the house to throw out some trash bags, leaving the door unlocked, and unknowing to her, Richard had gone in through that door after leaving a bullet in the mailbox, entering the house with the same .22 caliber pistol he used in killing his first victim. He shot Teresa 3 times, once in the hand, which she lifted in defense to cover her face, and twice in the head, instantly killing her. After killing Teresa, Richard dragged her body into a bedroom and took advantage of her dead body while continually stabbing her with a butcher's knife. Using a yogurt cup, he gathered the blood which was pooling on her stomach, drank it, and proceeded to cut off her left nipple to drink from it as well. He also sliced open her torso, pulling out her spleen and intestines, while still stabbing her liver, diaphragm, and left breast. Richard then grabbed a bucket and collected the blood which was pouring out of Teresa's body. As if that was not disturbing enough, he went into the bathroom and bathed in it. Later on, he stuffed her mouth with dog feces before leaving. Truly horrifying. 2 days after killing Teresa, Richard purchased 2 dogs from a neighbor. Without wasting time, he killed the 2 dogs, drank their blood, and left their bodies on the neighbor's lawn. 2 days after that, precisely on January 27, 1978, the now bloodthirsty Richard walked into the home of 38-year-old Evelyn Muroff via an unlocked door. Evelyn had been in the bathroom while a neighbor, Danny Meredith, had been watching her 6-year-old son and 22-month-old nephew, David Ferrara. Richard encountered Danny in the hallway and shot him in the head. Hearing the gunshot, Jason ran into his mother's room to seek refuge. However, moments later, Richard walked into the room and shot Evelyn, Jason, and David. After killing Evelyn, Richard sexually violated her dead body and stabbed her at least 12 times in the anus. Using a bucket, he gathered her blood and organs so that he could take them home and eat them. He took David's dead body into the bathroom and smashed his skull open. While doing so, a neighbor whose child had a play date with Jason had arrived at the house and was knocking on the door. The knock alerted Richard, who took David's body and fled with it in Evelyn's car. After knocking for a while and getting no response, the neighbor went into the house and found the dead bodies of Danny, Jason, and Evelyn. Immediately, she phoned the police. When Richard got home, he cut off David's penis and used it as a straw to drink the baby's blood. After using the insides of the body for smoothies, Richard dumped the disemboweled pieces of the toddler near a church. The police later found Richard's shoe prints and handprints in Evelyn's blood. On January 28, 1978, Nancy Holden called the police after hearing the FBI readout of his profile on TV. She told them that Richard could be the killer. She said that she had seen him in Teresa Wallen's neighborhood the day she was killed and had been frightened by how he looked. The police also checked his profile and saw that he had a .22 caliber pistol registered to his name. They then went to Richard's apartment and arrested him. In Richard's apartment, the authorities found that the walls, floor, ceiling, refrigerator, and all the utensils he used for eating and drinking were covered in blood. They also found human brains, organs from Teresa and Evelyn's bodies, a 12-inch butcher knife, rubber boots, animal collars, 3 blenders containing blood, as well as a calendar where he marked today on the dates he killed Teresa and Evelyn. Richard's trial began in May 1979. He, however, pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Several psychologists were then brought in, all of whom deemed him sane. He was found guilty on 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to death by gas chamber at San Quentin.
Within 10 days, Richard Chase will be taken from the jail here to San Quentin State Prison, where he will be housed on condemned row.
Richard began receiving medication following his sentence. Rather than actually taking his medication, he stockpiled it until he had enough to kill himself. Richard was eventually found dead in his cell on December 1979. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Richard Chase. And why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.